Jake Turner had buried his beloved wife beneath a lonely cottonwood tree overlooking the endless western plains, and as the last handful of earth fell upon her grave, he knelt beside his 6-year-old son, Eli, placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, and made a promise that would shape the rest of their lives. No matter how cruel this frontier becomes, no matter how many storms come our way, I'll never let you face them alone. From that day forward, Jake became more than a father. He became Eli's teacher, protector, and greatest hero. Every sunrise found the two working side by side beneath endless skies, repairing broken fences, breaking wild mustangs, planting crops, hunting for food, and learning to survive in a land where danger hid behind every hill and kindness was rarer than rain. Yet every evening, when the stars covered the sky, Jake told Eli stories about courage, honesty, and never allowing hatred to poison a good man's heart. Unknown to them, dark eyes watched the lonely ranch from distant ridges, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived when the ruthless outlaw Boone Carter rode into town with a gang of heavily armed riders, demanding protection money from every struggling rancher in the valley. Families who refused found their livestock stolen, wells poisoned, and homes burned to the ground. When Boone finally reached Jake's ranch, he laughed at the simple cabin and warned him that anyone who refused to pay would lose everything. Jake calmly looked Boone in the eye and answered that a man who surrendered his honor had already lost more than any outlaw could steal. Boone's smile vanished. That very night, flames consumed Jake's barn, while terrified horses screamed in panic and smoke filled the sky. Jake barely managed to rescue Eli before the roof collapsed behind them. By sunrise, nothing remained except ashes, twisted iron, and the charred remains of everything they had spent years building. Boone believed he had destroyed Jake's spirit, but instead he had awakened something far stronger. Refusing to surrender, Jake and Eli began rebuilding their ranch one board at a time. Day after exhausting day, they hauled timber, repaired fences, rescued surviving animals, and slowly transformed the ruins back into a home. Watching the father and son refuse to quit inspired neighboring ranchers who had once lived in fear. One by one, they offered lumber, horses, food, and labor until the lonely ranch became a symbol of hope across the valley. Boone realized his terror no longer worked, and his anger turned into obsession. Secretly, he ordered spies to watch Jake's every move, waiting for one careless mistake. Instead, Jake quietly prepared the town, teaching frightened ranchers how to defend themselves while never revealing his full plan. Tensions spread through the valley as everyone sensed the inevitable confrontation drawing closer. Then one scorching afternoon, Boone returned with every outlaw he could gather, expecting another easy victory. Dust swirled through the silent main street as terrified families hid behind shuttered windows. Jake walked alone into the center of town, while Eli watched from a nearby rooftop, his heart pounding. Neither man reached for his revolver at first. The silence became unbearable. Suddenly, Boone fired without warning, but Jake moved like lightning, his shot striking Boone's weapon from his hand before a second bullet knocked the outlaw into the dirt. Boone's gang hesitated, only to find dozens of ranchers stepping from every doorway with rifles raised. Realizing their reign of terror had ended, the outlaws surrendered. Peace finally settled across the valley, and as the golden sun disappeared behind distant mountains, Jake looked at Eli and realized that fatherhood had made him stronger than any gunslinger the frontier had ever known. Yet the West never allowed heroes to rest for long. Only weeks after the celebration, Eli discovered fresh horse tracks circling their ranch before dawn. The tracks appeared every morning but disappeared before sunrise, as though invisible riders were studying every weakness of the property. Jake said little, but every instinct warned him that trouble had returned. One stormy evening, a tall stranger wearing a long black coat rode into town without speaking to anyone. His name was Wade Mercer, Boone Carter's older brother, a legendary bounty hunter feared across the frontier for never abandoning a vendetta. Unlike Boone, Wade relied on patience instead of anger. Rather than attacking Jake directly, he quietly gathered dangerous outlaws, bribed desperate criminals, sabotaged supply wagons, poisoned water holes, and terrorized neighboring ranches, hoping Jake would rush into an ambush. Every attack carried the same chilling message carved into wood with a hunting knife. Your turn is coming. Families began abandoning their homes while whispers spread that nobody could defeat Wade Mercer. Jake refused to let fear destroy everything they had built. Under the cover of darkness, he secretly united every honest rancher in the valley, training them to ride together, defend one another, and never fight alone. At the same time, he continued teaching Eli that true courage meant protecting innocent people instead of chasing revenge. Wade watched from the hills, growing increasingly frustrated that every trap failed. Finally, he struck where it would hurt most. His gang ambushed the town sheriff, kidnapped him, and left a message demanding Jake surrender before sunrise or the sheriff would die. The entire town expected Jake to gather an army, but instead, he saddled his horse alone and rode into the dangerous canyon where Wade waited. Hidden among towering cliffs were dozens of armed outlaws, convinced Jake had ridden straight into certain death. What they did not know was that Jake knew every narrow trail, hidden, cave, and rocky passage from years of hunting. He used echoes to confuse the gang, triggered rock slides to separate riders, lured horses into dead-end ravines, and disappeared into the shadows before anyone could aim. Gunfire thundered through the canyon as panic spread among Wade's men, who could no longer tell where Jake would appear next. During the chaos, Jake freed the sheriff, and together they turned the battle against the remaining outlaws. At sunset, only Wade remained. The two enemies faced each other on a lonely cliff, where a single mistake meant falling hundreds of feet below. Wade promised to kill Eli and erase the Turner name forever. Jake answered with silence. 2 shots shattered the evening air. When the smoke drifted away, Wade lay defeated while Jake remained standing. The surviving outlaws fled without looking back, ending the Mercers' reign of terror forever. The grateful townspeople celebrated their freedom, but Jake returned quietly to his ranch where Eli waited at the gate. Father and son embraced without speaking because neither needed words to understand what they had survived together. Years passed, and the once dangerous frontier slowly transformed into a thriving community where children laughed in open fields instead of hiding from gunfire. Eli grew into a respected young man whose greatest strength was not his skill with a revolver, but the compassion his father had taught him since childhood. One spring morning, representatives from a powerful railroad company arrived with wagons full of gold, offering Jake a fortune to sell the ranch so tracks could cross the valley. Jake listened politely before refusing every offer, explaining that no amount of money could replace the memories buried beneath the cottonwood tree where his wife rested, or the home he and Eli had rebuilt from ashes with their own hands. The businessmen departed with cold smiles, secretly warning powerful investors that Jake Turner stood in the way of their plans. Before another conflict could begin, disaster struck from nature itself. A fierce wildfire exploded across the western hills after weeks of drought, sending walls of flame racing toward the valley faster than any horse could run. Smoke darkened the afternoon sky while terrified families fled carrying children and whatever possessions they could save. Instead of escaping, Jake and Eli organized the entire town into rescue teams. Some dug fire breaks, others drove cattle to safety, while Jake rode through burning forests, rescuing trapped families as flaming trees crashed around him. At one terrifying moment, Eli disappeared inside the smoke while searching for a frightened little girl. Jake charged into the inferno without hesitation, guided only by his son's distant voice. After what felt like an eternity, both emerged, carrying the child to safety just seconds before the collapsing flames swallowed the cabin behind them. When rain finally ended, the wildfire. The valley stood battered but alive because one father and one son had refused to abandon their neighbors. The grateful community honored Jake as the man who had transformed a lawless frontier into a place filled with hope, but he simply smiled and said the true hero was Eli, the little boy who had grown into the kind of man every father dreamed of raising. As another golden sunset spread across the endless western plains, father and son rode side by side across the peaceful ranch they had fought so hard to protect. They understood that their greatest victory had never been defeating outlaws, surviving ambushes, or facing impossible odds. Their greatest victory was building a family founded on love, courage, honor, sacrifice, and unwavering faith in one another. Long after both men were gone, travelers gathered around crackling campfires to tell the unforgettable legend of Jake Turner and Eli, reminding every new generation that the greatest cowboy the Old West had ever known was not the fastest gunslinger or the richest rancher, but the single father who never broke the promise he made beside a lonely cottonwood tree, and whose legacy of courage continued to inspire hearts long after the final echoes of the frontier faded into history.